You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. When a duck leaves here to migrate north, how far does it go before it reaches its breeding grounds? We're going to find out that answer and more today with Houston Havens, Waterfowl Program Coordinator at MDWFP.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. And today, waterfowl questions. This is a big, broad topic with Waterfowl Program Coordinator Houston Havens, who's been here before. Glad to have you back, Houston.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, and we were just discussing, I think, the first time that you came and joined us, we talked a lot about doves and dove season and the resident population versus those that come in. And I learned new stuff. Today, let's talk waterfowl and specifically duck hunting, kind of looking back at the season that was this past go-around. How'd it go?
Well, it was, kind of a tale of the beginning and the end, or a tale of two seasons maybe within a season. Early on, we were moving into the fall, relatively warm, not a whole lot of rainwater out there, so we're having to do a lot of groundwater pumping on public and private lands where those capabilities existed. And so things kind of struggled along for a little while early in the season, but we were fortunate to get some really cold weather in the month of January, kind of two major events, and we saw numbers pick up from those. And so it's always good to end on a high note. We certainly wish that things had materialized a little bit earlier in the season, but overall, looking back at some of our numbers from wildlife management area harvest, things like that, we weren't really too bad off of average as compared to the year before, which was a pretty poor season overall. A
little bit of a late comeback, so
that's right.
Kind of like good John Elway ball game, huh? It might be trailing by a touchdown, but late a furious comeback.
That's right. We definitely called a rally. Those who stuck with it, I think, were relatively pleased with the way the season ended.
Well, and you mentioned some cold weather late and like really cold.
That's right.
Like cold weather. And so you mean to tell me that duck hunters are paying attention to the weather just like a farmer or anybody else? Huh?
Absolutely. Paying attention to it, wishing for it, just really keeping an eye on things. And you talk about how cold it got. It was so icy and cold that it became a challenge. A lot of shallow water was frozen up during those really cold events. And, ducks are, built to weather to withstand those events, and they kind of adapt. And so that's kind of what we saw, that they bounced to areas with deeper water or flowing water and kind of rode things out. And then after those events, when things started thawing, we call it hunting the thaw. That's really when it actually was probably the best.
Okay, great. So fair to say that, those hunters that sort of persevered, stuck with it, they reaped the benefits late in the year.
For the most part, there certainly were some challenges. I seem to be one of those hunters that doesn't really have a lot of success going out and breaking ice. I usually just kind of stare at an empty sky, it seems like, on those hunts. But there were some people that definitely capitalized on it. Yeah.
So as we talk, and right now we're kind of mid-spring, I guess, early to mid-spring, with the season behind us, what are ducks doing right now? Like, what are they doing?
Yeah, so they're gearing up for spring migration. Some have already begun their spring migration back north. For Mississippi ducks, most of the birds that are here during the fall and winter time are not residents of Mississippi. We have a strong wood duck population that's here throughout the year for the most part. But most ducks are recovering from winter as things are starting to warm up a little bit. They're eating a lot of invertebrates in wetland habitat that's still available on the landscape, and getting ready to head back north, hopefully in really good condition so they can crank out some more ducks and come back next year.
So they're getting ready to head north. That's what the waterfowl doing, the ducks. What is a waterfowl biologist doing this time of year?
Yeah, so we get that question a lot, and people think, oh, this is kind of your slow time, huh? And it's really not. As soon as the season ends and the growing season begins, early spring, we're talking with public and private land managers about, okay, what do we need to do to start getting ready for next year? And so that can involve water level management. We try to encourage land managers to keep water on during this time of year. Number one, because there are still ducks here, whether they're moving through from the Gulf Coast where they wintered, or birds that are still hanging around from the winter. they're still using those habitats is really important because, as you can imagine, you think about the Mississippi Delta, where there's a lot of flooded cropland during the wintertime. Well, a lot of that water's gone off the landscape now because those farmers are getting things dried out. They're getting ready for planting season for this year. And so any shallow water managed habitat with good foraging habitat is really important for ducks this time of year before they do leave and start to head back north. So that's a big part of it. And then as things continue to dry out, we'll be getting a lot of phone calls from private landowners who want us to come out and take a look at their property, what they have, talk through maybe things that they're thinking about or maybe things that didn't work the way they thought they would, and trying to come up with strategies for improving their habitat and moving forward.
I was thinking as you were talking, about the weather patterns, the cold at the end of the year, the way it changed in the spring. You mentioned, the early season for farmers. Does it vary, that cycle, does it vary greatly from the northern part of the state versus the most southern part of the state? When you think about the state of Mississippi, sure. I guess I'm thinking wouldn't it cycle a little earlier south than it does north?
Potentially. We see that with weather events, waterfowl hunters talk about the freeze line, and when we get, if we get north, the North Delta, let's say, for an example, we get weather that's just cold enough for things to freeze up there, they'll certainly bump down below the freeze line. And so that has some impact on within state movements of birds. But generally, for the most part, it's kind of a holistic, all or nothing as far as birds in Mississippi. We do aerial waterfowl surveys throughout the fall and wintertime. We put those reports out on our website as soon as we get done with those. And that's one way that we track bird numbers or waterfowl numbers throughout the Mississippi Delta portion of the state where most of our waterfowl habitat is and most of our hunting is. And we're able to look at those trends through time with that data, kind of show how we compared to previous years. When did our peaks hit and when did birds kind of start to leave the state? And so really good information if people, are not aware of that to go on and check that out over, the last several years to take a look at where we've been with those numbers.
Sure. So as far as, again, kind of your after one season, prior to the work that gets done in the summer, when is the decision made of what the next cycle's dates are going to be, the start date, end date, and the regulations for the next year? When does that happen?
Yep, that's going on right now.
Okay.
So we're actually this month presenting or proposing season date recommendations to our commission. Once they approve those, then they'll go out for public comment. And so we'll be getting some feedback on those. Those typically go final by late April. We have to send those in to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service so they can start the actual regulations printing process and all. So it's a really complex system, but it's a very data-driven system with migratory game birds. We have a lot of monitoring programs. Going into the spring, waterfowl hunters will be familiar with May pine counts, where pilots are in airplanes, just like we do here during the wintertime. They're doing in the springtime, flying over Prairie Pothole region, other important areas for breeding waterfowl, and getting numbers that feed into the whole regulations process system. So, if the numbers are up, then we have, long seasons with liberal back limits. If numbers go down, then we'll back off with those regulations to kind of compensate for that.
And so some of that data and all those things, it's going on right now.
It will be very soon. Yeah. So during May is when those surveys are flown, and then those reports usually come out in the summertime, and that kind of just kicks off the process for the next year.
Yeah. What are the major? You touched on some of it, but I guess those major factors that determine that. You mentioned the data that's drawn there. Mm-hmm. What about previous season data and all that kind of stuff? How does it play in?
So I would say major factors that influence the number of birds that we have here, certainly weather driven, that is the number one and always will be the number one factor. But it's habitat driven. So whether we're talking about the breeding grounds and producing ducks that are eventually going to come here during the fall and winter, or if we're talking about just providing a place to hold birds and to attract birds here in the state of Mississippi, it's habitat driven. And so that's why it's important for us to work with private landowners in Mississippi, 80 to 90% privately owned. We can't do it all on public lands. We certainly know that it's important to provide public hunting opportunity on public lands and manage those resources as best we can, but also working with private landowners who own the lion's share of the state and are able to provide really quality habitat for those birds when they get here. On the breeding grounds, again, very habitat driven, precipitation really throughout the wintertime and into the spring. So those potholes where ducks are using during the summertime have plenty of water, plenty of grassland. And so Mississippi is a state that believes in investing in that breeding habitat, which is not in Mississippi, at all. We're talking about, 1,000 miles from here or more, but investing in conservation programs that are protecting those areas that are producing the birds that are going to eventually make their way back here.
Houston, when you were talking about the breeding ground being like 1,000 miles away, anytime I think about waterfowl habitat or just how you're managing waterfowl seasons and all that, like it's not just the weather in Mississippi, it's the weather all the way up north. That's like right. Up in Canada. And how far down do they fly to? Like, let's say that I'm like a mallard, where I'm at right now.
Well, that's a good question. Right now, we have, through a cooperative project with Mississippi State University, we have some transmitters on some mallards that we put on this winter. Oh. And so we're starting to see where those birds are moving to. About half of them have started their northward migration already. Some of them are still hanging around here in the habitat that's still available. And that's typically what we would expect around mid-March to late March when birds really start to mass migrate north. So just to give you an example, right here during mid-March, we've got some that are in Minnesota and Wisconsin, Iowa, maybe one or two in Missouri, and then we have some that are still here in Mississippi. So,
how far down south will they go?
So for mallards, typically, at least in Mississippi, most of them are stopping in the South Delta portion of the state.
So they're not going to try to go down to Mexico or anything like that. Are there any waterfowl that will do that, like teal or anything?
Absolutely, blue-winged teal for sure. They're passing through here in late August through September. We have a September teal season, and so those birds are moving through during that time of year, and a lot of them will go down to Mexico and Central America for the duration of the winter, and they kind of are coming through. In the month of April, we'll see a lot of those birds that are headed back north and moving through Mississippi during that time.
So you tag some here that, like you say, are already in Iowa, are already in Wisconsin. And I'm just wondering, and obviously it would vary per, individual animal, but how many miles they're averaging covering per day once they decide, all right, I'm out.
Right. How
many miles a day, if you were to track it right down to that, specific data, I'm just curious how many miles a day they might cover.
Yeah, I don't have a specific answer for you there, but it'll be something interesting to look at with this project. But
ballpark, are we talking about, 50 miles a day, 20?
Oh, no, way more than that.
100.
Hundreds
Hundreds of miles a day.
It's, once and of course, favorable weather plays a part in that. Wind, they catch a good wind.
Good tailwind.
Use that. That's right. But especially on southern migration, when birds are making those big jumps from, say, southern Canada down into the lower Mississippi Valley, they're doing it in a day or two a lot of times. So,
wow.
I know when you were here last time, you were talking about how Mississippi has its own resident dove population for mourning doves. Do we have any resident duck populations? I know that I know the Canada geese probably hang around here all the time because I see them all the time in the Jackson metro area.
And at Ballard Park in Tupelo, just about year round, there's a mallard or two swimming around on that pond. So I know we got some that stay around.
That's right. Yeah. So most of the resident ducks that we have in Mississippi are going to be wood ducks or hooded mergansers.
Okay.
Those are if we're talking wild ducks. Just like you mentioned, you see, your city parks, things like that are going to have
loaf bread year round.
That's right. Usually those are going to be domestic, so the people have raised and or purchased and put out. And so there certainly are some of those. But as far as wild ducks that are staying in Mississippi throughout the summer, raising young here, wood ducks are by large. Wood ducks are by and large the most abundant species that we're going to have here.
Okay. banding. What about that process, this year, like when it happens, when it starts for you?
Yeah, so we do wood duck banding and mourning dove banding during the summertime, July through August for doves, and then for wood ducks we can go through the month of September. And so what we're trying to do there is mark what we consider to be a representative sample of birds that were actually Mississippi residents or birds that were raising young here. And so this is the time period when they've produced young. Those young have fledged, which means they're capable of flight now, and so they're part of the population. And so we trap those birds, put a aluminum leg band on them. We record the sex and age of the bird, and each leg band that's on the bird has a unique identifying number on it. So we record all that information, release the bird back into the wild. It's a really cool part of the job, as you can imagine, getting out and being able to do that. But the band return information that we get from that is also really interesting. So say a hunter harvests one of those birds, of course, they see the band on the bird, they report it, they get the information. So it's cool for the hunter to see, okay, where did that bird, at least where was it banded? And if it's a young of the year bird, a lot of times that would indicate that that's actually where it was hatched. So that's interesting information. And then for us as a biologist, it's good information just to tell us about bird movements, gives us harvest rate information on that marked portion of the population. And so it's a win-win. It's kind of a trophy thing for a hunter to harvest a banded bird, but it's really, really good population monitoring information for us.
Yeah. And you capture those birds how?
Yep. So we a little very different from doves to wood ducks, but if we're talking wood ducks, we go out and find a place that has water during the summertime, has good bird numbers on it already, and we'll start to bait the edge of the water with wheat or corn. Usually wheat is what we're using for wood ducks. We'll put up a trail camera usually just to be sure that we've got birds using bait, and as they're consistently using that bait, we'll start to move it onto the bank if we've got a really clean bank next to the water there. If we start to get really good numbers where we think it's going to be worth actually doing a catch there, then we'll move in and put in a rocket net. And so basically a rocket net is what it sounds like. It's a net we stretch out on the ground, drive T-posts down that has little holders for holding the rockets in. We've got powder charges that go in each rocket, and we've got a wire running into a blind, usually, down the levee or what have you. So we can get in there early in the morning and watch birds come in. When they get on bait good, we'll touch off the rocket with a battery and get out there and pull the birds out of the net so we can start working them up.
Pretty cool. It's like a different kind of hunting almost.
It is, yeah. It's a lot like hunting, and things can go wrong. Other wildlife can run the birds off, or maybe they just don't show up that day. I'm sure that time of year brings, some mosquito spray too. Oh, absolutely, yes. I said morning shoes, but sometimes we do afternoons, and those are really not fun in August. Where you're having to get out there at 4:00 in the afternoon and sure. really kind of sweat things out, waiting on birds to show up.
Houston, you're a pretty big duck hunter yourself. Have you harvested any ducks that have been banded?
I have harvested one wood duck that was banded. It was before I started working here, so it wasn't the really cool experience that I'm waiting on of one that I knew I'd actually banded. But I know some biologists that have done that before, which would be really, really cool to experience. But band returns are really an interesting part of duck hunting. People are really into it. It's just kind of a trophy deal when people are able to get that experience.
Sure. And I think about too, that whole process. You mentioned the data that you're able to pull from that. Again, sometimes it's easy for someone like me or someone listening. You think about one experience, you describe one, the rocket net. Okay, we got them, we banned them. But in order for that to really be a process that's advantageous for you and for the number, like there's a lot of people involved in that, and it's a lot of time. It's a huge effort, isn't it? I mean, you describe it as one experience so that I can get the picture, but this is a big, broad study that's going on.
It is. Yep. Every state in the country that has waterfowl, they're doing some level of banding, and of course, a lot of the birds that hunters in Mississippi are harvesting during the wintertime, are going to be birds that are banded in other states or provinces, throughout North America. And so it certainly is a whole lot of effort, a really cooperative, collaborative effort that each state and each province is putting in for, the greater good of the conservation of the resource.
I want to go back. So north of here, as the year goes on, the warm part of the year, breeding grounds where, they're hatching out young and they're going to grow. And then here they come, as they migrate down, and that affects the numbers, all of that. So go over that again, the part of the country we're talking about where these birds are going to, they're going to, have young, and then they're going to come back from. Where are they going?
Yeah, so that's we have a lot of information from band returns already. That's one aspect of this study with Mississippi State that we're really interested in is, Mississippi specific birds, where do they end up, later this summer? And, once they basically stop movement, we kind of can, especially the hens, mallard hens, we can kind of surmise that, okay, that's where she settled in for nesting. And so that's really important to know where those areas are for Mississippi duck hunters buying a state waterfowl stamp. Where's that money going to? Well, some of that money is going to those areas to protect important habitats in the breeding grounds. But as far as where are they coming from or where they going, I guess this time of year, the eastern side of the Dakotas, North and South Dakota, are really important areas. That's kind of the southern end of what we call the Prairie Pothole region. Moving up into Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is a really important area, the southern portion especially. According to band returns, southern Saskatchewan is the leading, I guess, portion of North America where Mississippi ducks are actually originating from. And so that's good information to know, right? We want to be able to send our conservation dollars that are being used for breeding grounds. We want to target those areas that are really important for birds that are coming back here in Mississippi. Yeah,
that's really cool because I think about, when we've talked to, say, Adam, for example, about turkey and, what their predators are at certain times of year and what's robbing their nests and all that. So, but that's a Mississippi question for that particular species. But, ducks, we're thinking about that in Canada.
That's right.
And so what are, for those that nest there, Saskatchewan, what are their predators there that affect it?
Yeah, so similar to here, nest predators are going to be, your similar species, raccoons, things like foxes, minks. And and just like here with turkeys, habitat is the key, right? You can certainly boost nest success on some local scales with doing some predator control, but taking care of the habitat from the get-go, that's kind of the main focus of waterfowl breeding habitat. In this case, is kind of the main focus of waterfowl conservation. They've got to have the habitat for nesting in, and then you can boost the success there with doing some predator control as well on top of it.
Houston, we have a lot of draw hunts here at our WMAs. I know that, for example, when you want to go deer hunting, cane mounts that's the one you want to go to when you're deer hunting. What's the one that you want to go to if you're waterfowl hunting in Mississippi?
Ooh, if I just give you one, I'll make some duck hunters mad there. So I would say maybe the best way to answer that is to check out our weekly waterfowl report during the season every week. We kind of report things from the field there and give some harvest numbers. We give hunter effort numbers, or we call them user days as well. But in general, it's going to be in the portion of the state where we typically have the highest numbers of wintering waterfowl, which is the Mississippi Delta. And so just off the top of my head, areas like Mahana, Muscadine Farms, Howard Miller, those are some of the bigger areas on the Delta or in the Delta that are going to have draw hunts. And then we also have some areas that don't require a draw where people can just show up and go hunting when they're open. We find that from hunter surveys, that's really important. People just having a place to go hunt, let me figure out the rest of it, getting away from the crowds and, finding a place where ducks are using, but they just want to have a place to go. And so we feel like we do a good job of mixing that portfolio, I guess, of hunting experiences where, you have the restrictions of areas where you have to be drawn to hunt, and then we have some areas that are just open to get after it.
Yeah. Chip is technologically, like, he's way ahead of all of us. And
Don't flatter me.
He knows a lot about AI. He knows a lot about Chat GPT. And I'm just guessing, Chip, if we were to ask it after we're done with this recording with Houston to say, track which word did he say the most, I think it would be habitat. Because and even the title, it might say habitat, like real estate's location. Right. Habitat, because pretty much everything you've talked about, whether it's where they're going, the ones that are staying here, the length of time they stay after the season, what you're dealing with now with private landowners, like, that's the thing, isn't it? Habitat.
It is. That's number one on the list for sure. There are some other things that certainly would fall on there. Hunting pressure is one of those. We talk with landowners about, they'll often ask, well, how often can I hunt this place? Well, it's kind of a question that the birds have to answer. You'll find out pretty quick if you're hunting an area too often.
Yeah.
But certainly habitat is the key. Managing not only just the amount of habitat available, but also what's in the water or the quality of the habitat, and that's kind of what we get into with the spring and summer. Wetland habitat for the most part is at least seasonal wetland habitat. It's not going to have water on it during the summer. Plants are actively growing. People are, whether it's planting crops or growing natural vegetation that's eventually going to be flooded. It's a big part of the process of, knowing what you've got there and how to manage it.
So you gave us that number earlier, 80 to 90% is privately owned land here in Mississippi. So this may be a really dumb question. And if it is, no surprise. I've asked you a bunch of dumb questions but do you ever get a phone call from a new landowner? Somebody says, okay, I'm new at this.
Sure.
Or I'm starting from scratch. Or I got a place that people are telling me would be great, to duck hunt. And I want to do it, but I don't know what to do. I'm brand new. You ever get new phone calls?
All the time. Absolutely. Yep. We'll get a call from somebody, just like you said, just bought this place. Think I'd like to do X, Y, and Z, but I'd like to have somebody come out, take a look at it, and, just see, if that makes sense. And so we get a lot of those visits. A lot of times they want to know, what their property might be eligible for, in programs, things, maybe something that they don't know about that really fits with what they're trying to do with that property. And so, yes, it's a very common thing. People are always, buying and selling land. It's a big business, of course. And so, yeah, I've actually been on some properties with multiple, they flipped. And so I've been with different landowners on the same property.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's one of those too, where you've got to, in the waterfowl program, there's got to be enough people to sort of reach and, you get that phone call. Yeah, I can be there in a certain amount of time. So from a staff and a hands-on standpoint, how many people are working on this?
So in our waterfowl program, there's only 2 of us, but we work really closely with our private lands program, which John Gruchy coordinates that program. They are focused on private lands every day throughout the year. And so they're doing a lot of the site visits as well, going out and we'll tag team a lot, get out with other biologists, because I really think that that's kind of where we're at our strongest, when we're kind of, one person's there talking about something, the wheels are turning in somebody else's. And so we're kind of bouncing ideas kind of in real time off of each other and talking about, possibilities or different ideas.
Sure. And so as you talk about it, and you mentioned John, okay, from his standpoint, I just think about it, try to picture it from the standpoint of a landowner. What a cool resource it is in the state of Mississippi. If you are that new landowner, to be able to pick up the phone, call you or call John and say, hey, look, I got a million questions. I'm not even really sure where to start. And then y'all are like, okay, we'll be there.
Sure.
And you set up a time, and the comfort of a landowner who's a hunter, outdoorsman in Mississippi, to be able to say, I'm going to talk to the experts.
Right.
You've been at it for 17 years, to talk to somebody that knows. I think doesn't it speak to what a cool resource just really the whole department is for outdoorsmen in the state of Mississippi.
It really is. And people are surprised a lot of times that, hey, this is a free thing. You know, you'll just come out and take a look at it.
Nothing's free anymore, is it?
That's right. Right. Yeah. And so sometimes it's as simple as just talking about something on the phone, you know, asking, you know, when should I plant this, you know, that sort of thing. But usually, and the ones that we prefer is getting out and looking at it on the ground, you know, doing the site visits in the field with the landowner. I tell landowners that I work with that really the best benefit that I can give them is a property that I've been back on, because you know, if you're looking at something that the water just came off of in the springtime, growing season has really just started, that property is going to change quite a bit, or at least the wetland impoundments that they're trying to manage is going to change quite a bit throughout the growing season. And so, you know, making initial recommendations and then getting back out there with them and kind of walking through what happened, what worked, maybe, you know, what didn't turn out as good, and kind of monitoring as they go is kind of a real benefit.
Yeah. Well, and Houston, as the waterfowl program coordinator, pretty clear it's not just a duck season job, is it?
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah. You know, when duck season gets here, I guess you would say the hay's in the barn, so to speak, at that point. We're kind of shifting over to just seeing where ducks are using it and kind of tracking things. But yeah, the field work really starts in the spring on through, I guess, the end of the summer. It's always hot and heavy.
Yeah. Really cool. Yeah. Well, it's really neat to hear about it, learn a little bit about it. And I'm sure we could go deeper, but you've made me think you're really busy. I need to probably turn you loose.
Always something to do. Sure.
Always something to do. Houston Havens, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Talking waterfowl. Hope you all enjoyed that on the podcast, and we'll see you outdoors.